computer right now. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. He took me. Okay, so I'm gonna start. First thing I want to do is go around the room. Say who's here.
Angie Willoughby from
Willoughby. Was everybody able to say it again?
Angie Willoughby from Livingston.
Was everybody able to hear that? Because the phone's sort of far from her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Joe Ellen from PIHP.
Then this is Jessica from PIHP. And if you look on the webinar screen, you can see all the participants by webinar and phone.
Probably on your phone. Did you call into it, or did you do the?
If you could mute your phone unless you're speaking, there'll be a lot less background noise. Please. I think. Right from there. Okay, so Access is not going to be hugely involved in this process of letting people, there's Bobby, that went away as well. There's going to be a new way for providers to start entering their sub-abuse admissions. It's mostly going to be a change for them. The access will be affected a little tiny bit. We hope as little as possible. And so we just want to make you aware of what's going on. There's a really important disclaimer here is that this is so new in every single way. So we're trying our hardest to think of things that we didn't think of and make sure we make a viable path. But even just as, you know, recently as last night and this morning, we're like, oh, shoot, we didn't think about that. So we put in the training, like, for now, this is our solution. It's not ideal. We'll have a better one soon. But your input is hugely valuable to try to make this as frictionless as possible. That's what we're all gunning for. Okay, so the basic deal here is, and I'm on page 1 of the training document. And again, you have the correct document if it says updated 3/21/19. Have that, then you'll want to go back to that link I sent. So the reason, just so you know, the background of this, why we're doing this is because sub-abuse providers were never able to give us information about their PI indicators because we don't share an EMR. So we were sending them these Excel sheets, they were filling it out and sending it back. It was ridiculous. We also had situations where they had clients that were assessment only and there was no way for them to document that. And then the third thing, which isn't written here, but it's true, is that the request date for sub-abuse services is getting lost in the fray. So this new system is supposed to help deal with all of those things. It's certainly not the most elegant solution.
That was Vicki.
Vicki, you're muted.
Sorry, I just turned it off.
But seriously, folks, if you could mute your phone unless you're going to speak, that would be appreciated. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into this. Like I said, it mostly won't have to do with you, but you will be the one entering the request date. So that's, and getting them connected up with the sub-abuse providers, so that's where you're involved. Here's just a tiny overview of what it looks like. So now all the sub-abuse admissions and discharges are going to be enclosed in something called a wrapper. Here's what it looks like, sort of like how the iClasses work. We have this wrapper, and inside the wrappers, you have the request date, you have their admissions and discharges, if there's a referral that's in there. And if you click inside of it, you also see there's information about their PI indicators. So the place that you're going to get involved is every time a sub-abuse provider needs to enter an admission, there has to be a wrapper to put the admission in. That wrapper has got to have the request date included in it. And if you're the one receiving the request, that's going to be you. So that's basically Access's function here, is to start a wrapper for subabuse providers to enter their admissions in and make sure the request date is correct. So the way you're going to do that, I'm not going to follow this handout exactly right now. I'm going to do it live. So I'm going into, this is training. You go to SUD. When this is implemented, you're going to see the SUD treatment episode. You'll click on it. You'll select a consumer as usual. So as soon as someone calls, you authorize them, you know they're going to go to a provider to get a face-to-face assessment. You need to create the wrapper that that person's going to put the subabuse admission in.
So in Monroe, this would be after you screen the person and they say, I want to go to a provider, and then you are going to do the authorization, and then you'll create this treatment episode or wrapper.
So to do that, and I'm on page 3 of the handout. You hit Add SUD Treatment Wrapper. Okay, so the first thing is you put the affiliate. I'm just going to fill in whatever, Lenawee. The assessed by is the provider that you're sending them to who's going to do that face-to-face assessment. Let's just say it's going to be Catholic Charities. These two are required. By putting Catholic Charities in there, now when Catholic Charities goes into Cricut, they will see the wrapper. They won't see it unless you identify them here. So it's really important. So it's required. The treatment agency, this might, for some people, this is like a no-brainer. It's whoever's going to go and end up giving them their ongoing subabuse treatment services. There are some odd cases in Lenawee and Washtenaw where they actually refer them out. The assessing provider isn't the treatment provider. Don't worry about that if that's not you. It's not required. This is where you enter in the request date. This is the request from the perspective of the consumer. It's not the first time you heard about it. It's when they would say they called and asked for services. So let's just put in the current date. This is required. I don't know, everybody's got a different local policy about the also putting in the date of the appointment. I believe in Lenawee, this is required. So it says here in the handout, this is not, I mean, the computer is not going to stop you if you don't enter this, but you may have local clinical requirements that say whether or not you need to fill this in. In Lenawee, this is a requirement. So after you get the appointment with that assessed by provider, then you put in what that appointment is.
So Jessica, I have a question about the request. I have a question about the request date. When you say request date, it's what the consumer identifies as a first request for service. So if we're playing phone tag back and forth, and this has been going on, let's say they called once a month ago, and then they called again, and we finally got a hold of them, and 30 days have passed because we haven't reached them. We're still going to record that 30-day first request?
What do you guys think?
I mean, how long? That's what, you know, it's not the day that we actually talk to them. It's the day that they feel that they first asked for the service. So how are we going to accurately reflect that?
Let's go around the table here and see what people think.
Would you not, Andrea, would you have a request for service or a screening in there from when they originally called?
No, there's several instances that happen where they'll call. We've called back 2-3 times and we still haven't gotten a hold of them. We've left them messages, and then they'll call back 2 weeks later and they'll, you know, put in another request for, you know, it's not a request, but a call log. So what date are we going by? Are we going by the one that they never returned our call, or are we going by the one that they just called?
I would say the first one, the very first time they called and left a message. But then in the notes here, write down, like say they called for the very first time on the 1st. Access tried to call back on the 1st, but they didn't answer. Access tried to call them back on the 2nd, but they didn't answer. So then the client calls back on the 14th and says, yeah, I called you 2 weeks ago. I would still use that date of the 1st, but put in the notes the dates that you tried to call and why it would be 2 weeks after, or why it would be a month after.
So I'm putting this in the notes, what that might look like.
So is that going to make it out of compliance to the state though, or is that just that excuse right there, or that note is going to like make it an exception?
In Lenawee, if we aren't able to get that phone call, that's still, our directors made the decision that the day they called us is their request date. And if we didn't have someone available to speak with them and we lost them, then that's on us. So in Lenawee, it truly is the date that they called and requested the service. And it's based on previous HTAG audits. That is what they go by as well.
I think we should all be consistent with that.
I agree. It's an excellent question, Andrea. Thank you so much for bringing that
It
up.
feels bad, but
Feels that's right. But you
it's
did,
true.
you lost them.
So just to clarify, the question, I'm writing my own note. If they called you and nobody answered the phone and they left a message and it took a zillion calls back to finally get a hold of them, and you only got a hold of them like 2 weeks later, what is the request date? Request date is that first call that they made to you. From their perspective, that's when they tried.
no, in Livingston, we may be doing the screening and authorizing them for a treatment, and they need to call us back because they need to choose, or they haven't chosen where they want to go. I think that's
That's
different. That's different.
That's where the consumer chose a date outside of 14. You offered them something, but they declined it. And there's a way to document that too.
Okay. That's residential, typically that happens. where
Yeah.
We want them to choose.
That's a really good point too. These are all, this is, so questions like that and these kinds of comments are so helpful because we all are learning and we want to come up with the best solution. The more information we have, the better our solution will be. So once you've entered this, you hit save. All this other stuff is for indicators 2 or 3 and 4, and that really doesn't have much to do with access. So hit save. Now I'm back in the list screen, and I can see this. It's like an empty wrapper. It's just ready for somebody to add either a referral or an admission. Because I selected Catholic Charities, this is what they'll see also. So when they go into add an admission, they'll go, oh, this must be it. Here was the request date, and they'll add an admission to this. I think this part is like super straightforward. We were trying last night to think about when might it be like a little bit off and coming up with what to do. So there's a couple cases that are being covered next. So now I'm on page 5 of sorry, just kidding, page 4. And this is what just came up a second ago. What if, when this is going on, you offer them a date that's within 14 days of the request, but they decline this offer and choose something outside of the 14-day window?
Or don't respond.
Or don't
This is
respond.
different than what we just said.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't get it then. Can we cover this one and then do that one? Like, so, like at the very end of this, let's like write down all the other cases that we can think of what if. All right, so this one that I'm going to talk about now, beg your pardon, I just understood
No,
that,
that's fine.
is if you offer them a date within 14 days and they decline this offer. So let's imagine we're still back in there. I'm going to hit change because that's how you can get back into the editable version of the wrapper. So what if they called on 3/1? You said we can get you in on 3/7, and they're like, nope, I'm going to be on vacation. Can we try for something. Well, then the next thing I have is 320. When you do that, it's going to automatically prompt you for more information, asking why. You can only enter this, that the consumer requested it, if it was truly because of them. You can't do this because I didn't have a date for them, because it's still out of compliance unless you show the original date offered. So I was, in my example, saying, we have something for you on the 7th, and they're like, no, thanks. It's out of compliance unless we offer them something within 14 days. So you would check the consumer requested it, you give the offer date, and so you know, offered 3/7, they were on vacation. Yeah, go ahead.
In Monroe, this isn't going to happen very often.
Okay.
So just so you guys know, this is how you do it. There's not very many instances where you'll need to do this.
Good to know.
Okay, because generally we don't make that appointment unless it's a special circumstance. So that's why I was good. That was my next question. Thank you, Joellen.
That's because in Monroe, you guys determine the level of care at the screening. So you're already making that referral to the provider for that level of care.
Okay.
But you're not scheduling.
They don't schedule the appointment.
They do that on their own.
They put the auth in the system, and then the client calls the provider directly and schedules all of this.
We do that, but we offer, like, the engagement. We put in the date for the next engagement that's available. That's a drop-in, and anyone can come. So we call the provider.
Okay.
It's not treatment.
We can't hear whoever's speaking right now, just so you know.
Angie, I was just saying that in Livingston, we don't offer an appointment date for an assessment. What we offer is, we put in the auth for the provider, but we offer them the next engagement meeting, which is a drop-in group. And then we notify the provider that they'll be attending that, and then they set up the appointment at that time with the person.
So would that be considered a first appointment?
I was just wondering that. Is there a CPT code when they go to that drop-in?
They're
It's a counter,
it's an encounter, but it'd be before their intake,
right?
because it's a file.
You know, the state, I don't know if I want to muddy the waters with this, but the state is going to change this indicator in a bunch of ways. And when it's changed, I know that will work. For the purposes of this indicator, it's the way it's configured now. This is the time to the assessment. And that first appointment, although it's clinically very much wonderful.
So we should leave it blank then, the way Monroe.
It's actually, when it says, right now, what this means when it says date of first appointment is date of assessment appointment. When they change the indicator, it's going to truly mean date of anything, first appointment, be it an assessment or whatever. Another question that comes up is, what if the consumer, before you even get a chance to offer them, they say, I'm going to be on vacation for the next 2 weeks, don't schedule me anything in there. Then what you need to do is put in the date that you would have offered them, whatever opening is in there, because this is how we prove to the state that it wasn't a resource issue, that the reason they're outside of the 14 is not because we said we don't have anything for them. We just need to have a date in there that they could have come in. When you enter this, it's going to automatically, as long as you put in the offer date in that, it's going to automatically call it an exception. Are there any questions about that we didn't cover? Can you guys still hear me on the phone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so that was one thing that might come up. Here's another thing that might come up. This is where it starts to really, we're trying to get our heads around this. This is really complicated and hard, actually. I think once we find a solution, it won't be, but right now it's hard. What happens if they call you and you're like, all right, do, I'll set you up with an appointment. You go into SUD episodes and there's already a wrapper in there. That means they've already called at some point, and for whatever reason, that request never amounted to an assessment. there's an empty wrapper sitting in there, which will happen, right? The system already, I can tell you, it won't let you have more like overlapping wrappers for the same provider. So if you try to make another one, you're gonna get an error. So the question is how should you deal with this? And so in the example, we're saying like, what if they call, you know, we have this 3-1 and they were supposed to come in, they never did. They call you again, you go in and you're like, what am I supposed to do now? So as far as we can tell, this basically boils down to 2 cases. The first case is if it hasn't really been too long since that request is already existing in there, and the definition of too long is local policy. We probably should get aligned on this really soon, but at the moment, this is up to your locality. Suppose that your local policy says if it's within 30 days, so assume it's 30. If it's within that X days, then you should treat it like a reschedule. So to do that, again, you go into the wrapper, and I'm right now at the bottom of page 5 in the handout. So I know in Monroe, you might say, well, call the provider and reschedule it then. In that case, it's the provider that will be doing this, and you don't need to worry about it. But if for some reason it has to be you, this is how you deal with it. So you go in there, you see that, you click consumer reschedules first appointment. So let's say they called today to reschedule that one. It's been within 30 days of the first one, like 3-1, it's not yet 3:30, is it? So the day they call is today. And when they called, we ended up getting them a new appointment for tomorrow, let's say. And then you hit save. Does that make sense? Okay, psychic prediction. The next question is going to be, what if they miss that one? And then they call again. And the answer is you always just put in the latest one. So let's say they missed that 22. They call on the 23rd. Now the last rescheduled date was the 23rd. And you set them up with an appointment for 24th. And then you put in the notes. Then they called and blah, 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 blah. The notes is so that if you get audited and asked what happened there, nobody has to be searching through notes and notes and notes. Like, it's all here.
We don't call it that they no-show.
You can put no-show, but if they call back within, let's say, 30 days and say, no, seriously, I actually wanted that. I'm sorry, I missed it. Treat it as a reschedule. And it'll all be working off of the same request date. Good question. Okay, what?
When
Okay.
do you move it to? I had an appointment, they didn't come, do I go in and put no-show?
So, great question. That's where we were last time. Wouldn't you put in a no-show? So this is like, what if it's been more than 30 days? Or, is it, okay, so first, what if it's been more than 30 days and they do call? So that was like a year ago, and I see a thing in there. I need to clear that guy out so that I can put in a new wrapper. We have like ideal situations of what should be done, and we're back and forth with the programmer trying to work out a solution, and we don't have a solution right now. So what we're saying there on page 6 is delete it for now. It's really important that I say this out loud. This is clearly not an ideal way to deal with it, because we're losing the history of that request. So there was a request, it amounted to whatever, and then it just goes away. When we come up with a better solution, it will account for that. What we really want is something like where you click no-showed and it closes, you can see it, but it's not going to show up to the provider so that they get confused. But for now, delete it. And to do that, you just click delete. And as long as it's empty, like it's not connected to a VHS or anything, That should work. Okay. Are you serious?
Go back and come back.
Did I get canceled?
No.
There we go. Okay. And then you can add the wrapper. And maybe if you don't want to lose the history, if you really like to keep track of things, you could put in the notes what just happened. That I just deleted one that had a request date of 3/1 because they're calling back today and nothing happened.
But that's not queryable information.
Really not ideal at all. Yeah.
So what if they want a different provider?
If they want a different provider, so let's say they called Runaway, they had Catholic Charities at first, the request date was 3/1/19. Okay. You get a call again a little bit later because they miss it, and for whatever reason they want to switch providers now. You can change who the assessed by provider is and do reschedule. So it's still all working off the 3/1 request date, but at this point they've rescheduled not just the date, but the who. Does that
So
make
you
sense?
need a running log of that as you're going through and making those changes. Or it doesn't matter.
You type those changes
You
in
could
the
put it
notes.
in the
Was
notes.
initially supposed to go to Catholic Charities for outpatient, but now needs detox, so is going to Sacred Heart.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I would, because it's not like you're not going to need to know eventually. But I mean, technically, there's no star here. It's not gonna prevent you from saving it.
Right.
But think about what you're going to be asked later, I guess, and put it in the notes.
I guess the question is, do we document that in a note, progress note, and in here? You know what I mean? Or
Right here.
just document it.
Right here. Keep it all in place. Okay. Now, what was the situation that you brought up that I misunderstood?
Someone calls, we do the assessment and say, yes, you're eligible for residential treatment, detox and residential. And we don't tell them where they are going to go. We say, these are the providers available to you. Do you have a preference? Do you want to do some investigation? You know, so often they'll say, well, give me the numbers. I'll make phone calls and see what's going to fit my needs best.
Mm-hmm.
We may not get a call back for ever, or we may get a call back in 2 weeks, or we may get a call back that day. You know, it really varies.
Really?
Yeah.
That would be,
That's a monkey wrench, because we assume that Access would know who the provider is. Because the
Because
provider,
we don't pick it for them.
right,
there are times where clients say, I want to make my decision and call back, and then they're 2 weeks later.
Yeah, I need to make sure I have childcare. I need to make sure that my job is blah, blah, blah.
Well, I don't
So,
think you would enter the wrapper until you know you're authorized.
Right.
Oh,
That's
all
true.
right.
That's so true.
thank you, Lenny.
We've been trying to finish everything up as best we can, like you're done. You talk to people, you're done. So, you know what I mean?
Right.
Okay,
So this kind of goes hand in hand with your authorization. So you do the authorization, you know who you're planning on doing the assessment.
In that case, though, you would use the initial request date, the day that you first talked to the client. And then if it does happen to be outside of the 14 days, you could type that in the notes on the bottom.
are there any other what ifs that we would like to cover today? What are we not thought of? What's gonna be bugging us when it goes live?
I have a question about changing level of care.
Yeah. Wait,
Do you-
changing level of care?
Changing level of
Go
care.
ahead.
So they're in outpatient provider and then transferring to residential treatment. Do you start a new wrapper?
Yeah, that's a really great question. There can only be one admission in each wrapper, and if there's gonna be another admission, which there will be, then there has to be another wrapper.
Except for the assessment only people.
Human assessment.
So
Oh,
along that
Wait,
that same line of questioning, So if somebody's like open with Catholic Charities and receiving outpatient services, and then they discover that this individual needs detox, but they're going to return to Catholic Charities after their 5-day detox, would you, of course, the wrapper's already going to be open for Catholic Charities. Would you then close Catholic Charities out, reopen it for your detox provider, close the detox wrapper, and then reopen for Catholic Charities?
Great question, and no. So you would have one open for Catholic Charities
And for the,
and another one for a detox provider.
because we have an ability to go to Catholic Charities for treatment and then go to key development for Vivitrol or for whatever you're going to get. Then,
If there's going to be
So you
two
can have two
assessments, if there's 2 admissions, there's 2 wrappers.
all right.
Right.
So there can
in
be
Monterey-
more than one wrapper open if it's
But
a
not
different
for the
provider.
same provider.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
What could happen in Lenawee is we would refer them to Catholic Charities for level of care for residential, and it's just an assessment only.
Yeah.
So Catholic Charities will be doing the referral.
Okay, maybe we do need to talk about
Yeah.
this then. All right, so this is, for Livingston and Monroe, this won't happen. So close your ears. But in Lenawee, this could happen. We have situations where the provider, the assessed by provider, that's all they're going to do is they're going to get a face-to-face level of care assessment, and then they may end up saying, you're going to go get your services at another provider, Sacred Heart, let's say. So, like from your perspective, you've gone this far. Lenawee, Catholic Charities, request date, save. NA to get out of this. You're not going to do this, but that assessment provider, Catholic Charities, they're going to decide if they are going on to treat them, in which case they would add a sub-abuse admission, or refer them to somebody else for treatment, in which case they would fill this thing out. Referral. So what it is it's a lot like it just fills out all the BH-TEDS information and makes them open and close the BH-TEDS on the same day. And it has a disposition saying why they're not going to be the treatment provider. It'll say it didn't meet criteria, or they're going to go on to other places, detox, or whatever. So only in this instance do you not need a second wrapper for Sacred Heart. Sacred Heart, so there's going to be the referral within this wrapper and the admission, but you can't have more than one admission. What Catholic Charities did here is a referral. Can't have more than one referral, can't have more than one admission. At most one of each in each wrapper. Does that make sense?
So because Livingston is doing this, we're calling it a screening and not an assessment, because we level of care assessment.
But that's done in a screen.
Yeah.
This is their face-to-face. This is the H0011.
Yeah. But what Diane says is whoever does the H0001 is going to be the one doing ongoing services. So this is never going to be a thing for you.
Same with Monroe. They call access says you need outpatient, or access says you need detox and residential. And that level of care is determined at the time of screening.
So we would open up, there's one for the outpatient and one for the residential, because
If they go from one to the other.
we want that outpatient to remain constant. Often they do the outpatient before they even get to residential.
Yep.
Wait, so
Yeah.
we do both.
Absolutely. For Lenawee, we would send them, let's say we're sending them to Catholic Charities for that level of care assessment. And that's, at that point, that's all we're planning on them doing, is they're just doing the assessment, and then they're going to refer them to Catholic or to Sacred Heart. What's happening now with Nimbus is it's finding, I won't go into it, but it's going back and it's finding that assessment as start of service and as a prior service. It's not really a prior service, so it's knocking them out of the indicators. So that's why we have to do this referral. And on the mental health side, you know how when you're doing a TED, you have that option of it being an assessment only.
Right.
And then all the indicators and the state, everything calculates that differently. You don't have that on the mental health or on the SUD side as far as TED. So that's what this referral does, is it doesn't factor into all of that stuff. It's a way to say, hey, this was an assessment only.
Were there any other what else we want to cover before we go to the test?
Jen, has all that made sense?
I think so. I'm processing through it in my brain. I think so.
Yeah. We have spaghetti brains today, so trying to get through this.
Andrea and Vicki, you're okay?
I'm listening. I think I understand the steps that you're asking us to do, so.
Woohoo! That is a huge win. Okay, so if everybody would go to page 7 of the handout. And pick up that. Maybe we could do one at a time, so we don't have a big pause here. So for each scenario, you are going to say what has been filled in or clicked up to this point in time. And the choices A through L are up there at the top. So let's go. First one. Consumer calls access. Access to set up an appointment with a SUD provider within 2 weeks of the consumer request. What has been done so far in this scenario? Everybody just take like 30 seconds maybe? Everybody have an answer? Jojo, what's the answer?
A and F.
A and F? Oh, really good point. In Lenawee, it is A and F for sure. It may not be for you guys though, right?
It would be A for Monroe and Livingston, because they don't typically, technically know, but it says, has set up an appointment within 2 weeks.
You're right, but it's
No,
not necessary that they enter it, but in Lenawee it does.
Yeah.
And maybe you guys want to too. I don't see what could go wrong by entering that. It's only helpful. So yes. Are there any questions about that? Okay, how about the next scenario? Consumer calls access. Access found them an appointment at a provider the day after their request, but the consumer declined this offer, chose to get their face-to-face assessment 3 weeks from their request. Take a couple of seconds to figure it out. All right, Wendy.
G.
And
A.
And F. A, F and G in alphabetical order, I believe is the right answer. They would have the request date, the date of the appointment, and then all that stuff in G, because they all go together. Checkbox saying the consumer requested more than 14 days out, the offer date, and the note. Any questions about that one? Okay. Number 3, consumer called access. Access found them an appointment at a provider the day after the request, but they never show up to this appointment. They call back the day after the assessment was supposed to occur and request services again. Angie?
A.
Yes.
F.
Yes.
G. H.
Oh, I see what, wait,
G.
not G. Because I see
Oh,
what
that's
you,
not the 14 days, right, F and H.
A, F, and H. They request this, they have an original date. You may have marked them as a no-show, but that got changed from no-show to a reschedule. H is all the stuff that goes with rescheduling. And how do I know it's within 30? It was the day after.
In Lenawee, we would just tell them to call Catholic
Yeah,
Same-
we wouldn't.
Same with Monroe.
unless you were changing,
So I should say that.
Providers.
unless you're changing providers, you would refer them back to Catholic Charities.
So I should say here then, really the ideal thing is tell them to call that provider and reschedule, and the provider
Right.
will answer the
And-
job.
Yeah, and I think in general they do. Yeah, just call the provider.
In Monroe, I think a good thing to remember is if the authorization for the assessment is still valid, they should always be calling the provider to reschedule.
But those things will be filled out, but they'll be filled out by a combination of access
And
And the
provider.
Right.
Okay, the last one, consumer calls access. Access found them an appointment at a provider the day after the request, but they never show up. They call back a year after the assessment was supposed to occur and request services again. Delete it for now, which is E. I mean, there might have been a bunch of stuff in there, but ultimately, until we get a better solution, delete it and make a new one.
And that's only if the assessment has expired and it's after
The offset.
the offset, yeah.
Right, well, it's been, okay, so this one I
It's
should
been a
say,
year,
It's been
yeah.
a year, so I think by anybody's standard, it's been a long time.
So I might have
Okay,
missed
are
this
there
part, but how
Yeah.
how do you, so if they've completed treatment, they close, the provider closes out the SUD wrapper, and then if they call back, let's say 6 months later and want detox, we would enter a new one. Is that recorded all like in order? Does that maintain in there? Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So it's up to the provider that's gonna close the wrapper, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
this is really only, there's an empty wrapper in there. What are you supposed to do? But, I mean, the ideal thing is the wrapper gets filled with admissions and discharges, and then you, as you do now, see a history of admissions and discharges and the list.
This is really valuable information, though, that we're deleting. Question there.
Sure is. It's right, the reason we're saying this is because right now the state doesn't require us to hang on to the request date if it doesn't materialize into an admission.
But I mean, it's clinical information.
Well, wouldn't you have that in like your request for service or your screening? If you've ever gotten to the point of entering
Well,
a
that's why
wrapper,
I was asking
you would
about
have-
where we're documenting it, and you had just said, oh, we're just gonna document it. Yeah, document
I think-
in the record.
yeah, I think she's talking about the appointment,
Oh,
the reschedules. And this is almost like the calendar on the mental health side. It's giving so that,
But that never goes. We don't need that.
right, but it's,
Maybe we should
It's just-
use this time to talk about what would be ideal, so that when we talk to the programmer. So here's the danger. You don't want a provider going into the wrapper screen and seeing two wrappers, and then they have to choose which one to add the admission to, and then accidentally hooking up their admission to the wrong request date, right? Like, if they canceled their no-show from 90 days ago, and there's that wrapper hanging around in there with no admission in it, and then the provider goes, I don't know. And they just, but now they're way out of compliance, they choose
The wrong, yeah.
when they go in there, they should choose one.
There a way to archive them? So they, and I think this is what we were asking him yesterday, to have a checkbox that says, close this wrapper and this is the
Hide
reason.
it or.
and have a note box to say, why you just closed this
Yeah.
wrapper.
And then closing means it doesn't, the provider doesn't see it.
Provider can't enter any information, provider can't mess it up and choose the wrong one because they can't even see it. It's archived somewhere
I think we need to push this with them. And
Yeah.
before rollout.
Would that work for the other access people who are on the phone? Was it
Well, that
what
was-
we were just,
Comfortable because I'm more comfortable having a history on this than deleting something. It seems like it would make more sense that we see the process and how it's been working for that person, even if they haven't completed that admission.
The other thing is when the state changes this indicator, they will require us to hang on to this. So it's coming. It's just we need a good solution, and I don't want to do a knee-jerk sort of like, let's think it through. So when we close it, should we force somebody to choose why they're closing it?
Yes.
What should the choices be?
Authorization was used.
Why it wasn't used? Like, here's what I'm imagining. It's been a year, and you say, what happened to the other one? And they're like, I don't know, that was a year ago. So in that case, I would just, yeah, authorization wasn't used, don't know what happened. I don't know even what to say.
Did not engage in treatment,
Or just a
dropped out of treatment.
I mean, just
a tight narrative, and you have to say why.
narrative.
I mean, if once the state updates the indicators, then we're going to have to come up with some more things, but we'll have to base that on what the indicators say. We decide
We
what's
have
an
to make up-
exception, how about, then we'll have to come up with that.
If
But-
you do happen to know that the consumer no-showed, and that's what happened, shouldn't that, when you click consumer no-show, shouldn't it automatically close it?
But well, if that's the case, well, I guess not. If that's the case, let me finish my thought. If that's, so the client no-shows to that appointment, wouldn't the provider be the one to go in and say, oh, they had an appointment, no-show, close?
They could do. I don't know that they will always, so I guess it's, so if someone does it, then it's closed and you can't add admission to it unless you change it from no-show to reschedule. Does that seem okay?
Well, but if it does that, if Catholic Charities goes in, marks it a no-show and it closes, and then they call them the next day, now that wrapper can't see it. And we have to start all over.
I'm having a hard time understanding the use of that no-show button, to be honest. It seems like it's only complicating things, although it is important information.
It's important information when we start doing the data.
The cleanup.
Yeah, but
I think someone on the phone was about to say something.
Yeah, it's Jen. I was just going to ask about if the providers were able to go to deals, because a lot of times we don't know if they didn't no-show. The consumer handles it all with the provider. We wouldn't know. But I think you just answered that when you guys are talking.
I would think the provider would have to go in just like they have to close cases.
Yeah, they'd have to do it on the end, because we wouldn't know necessarily. We get a discharge summary, but it's usually it's a few weeks later before we ever know about it.
so we talked about, do we make the provider always have to go in and do something to the wrapper? Eventually, that's going to have to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, my whole thing is so let's say Washtenaw has 300 consumers, and of those, they're all in compliance. They reschedule, but they start the clock over and everything's okay. And when we go to do the data, it ends up that there's 30 people you need to investigate. So for those 30 people, are we going to make them go in every time an appointment changes for 300 people, every time they no-show, every time, and do all that documentation in our system when we only need 30? To me, I would rather go to them for those 30 that they're out on and make them go into the system and do all this documentation.
Or not necessarily out on, but when you're going in there and you're offing them and you see there's already a wrapper in there, you say, you guys need to figure out that one. There's an empty wrapper that needs to be accounted for before we can start. Or you could close it out. That's the
That's the kind of the beauty of leaving it all open, is that anybody can have access to do it.
The only thing is access is not going to necessarily know what happened to them.
We're not going to know it all.
At all, right? No, not right. It's a phone call. Somebody's going to have to.
At this point, the state is not when there's a question to end up being. Some people have it in their EMR, but we are not responsible for it. So that's why it's hard to say, you guys all need to do this. Yeah.
And that's the circle that's why we're like, okay, do we just delete it for now? because we're deleting it, but our clinical record is showing over here.
As long as we're not using the calendar, we can document in the calendar and it never goes away.
Right.
Where this does not function like the calendar.
It's not like the calendar, but it's functioning as the calendar as far as it's giving us the information that we need.
Well, because the important thing to remember, I keep that remind myself, is they have a calendar. It's not the information is nowhere. It's just that we're not making them duplicate the entry from their EMR to ours. What
Well,
we
and I just
actually need from
my team does both MI and SUD. I like to keep things as consistent as I can and not have to have different rules for every different person that you see. So it makes life a little easier.
Can we keep consulting this group as we think through a solution? I totally agree. Like, let's keep it simple, elegant.
That's where we were running into issues, is because the state doesn't mirror the two.
But they will, right?
But we're hoping that they will. Just like with TEDS not having the assessment only, why would you do it on mental health and not on SUD?
Right.
So you end up kind of with two sets of rules and trying to make it as easy for access, because they already have a gazillion rules to remember.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understood. When we go back to talk to SUD, we definitely want a thing where access or the provider can close it, and it will require an narrative. What we didn't seem to get closure on is, do we want it to automatically close when someone says no show?
No. I think it could just be hidden, and then we could re-see it if we hit another button, or hidden from the provider.
Or we could have like active and not active, like on the list screen. You know how there's it could like default to just the active ones, so all those other ones don't show up. That would also
we can inactivate it.
Yeah. Like you can see the old ones, like active consumers, like closed consumers and open consumers. It defaults to the open ones. So we don't want it to auto close when it's no show, because we want to be able to go in there and switch it to a reschedule. But if it's been more than X days, when we decide on what that X is, we shouldn't be able to reschedule it. So
outside of the authorization. Sure.
Yeah.
So I have a question then. Let's say someone was going to Catholic Charities for outpatient services, and they left that service and disappeared for a few days. They call us back, they say they want a detox. So, and that original wrapper from Catholic Charities hasn't been closed. So now we have to enter another one. Do we have to worry about that one not being closed yet, or for access purposes?
Or is it like a whole new admission?
So this wouldn't need to be closed, because we would eventually want that client to follow back up with Catholic Charities, even if they did detox in residential. That wrapper at Catholic Charities can stay open when you refer to detox.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about anything being closed if it's a different level of care?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
So what if let's say, and I don't know if this could happen or not, what if they were at outpatient services at Catholic Charities and they left, they didn't complete whatever their service was, but 30 days later they're calling us for more services, and that wrapper is still open for Catholic Charities. At that point, would we have to follow up to find out how come it's not closed, or?
I think they're authorized. Do you mean, and they didn't go to detox? They just like kind of fell off the face of the earth in the outpatient episode?
Yeah, well, let's say that they were in outpatient services and they just left or didn't come back to Catholic Charities. So then 30 days goes by and they call back and they're wanting us to authorize more services. So, yeah, and that original wrapper is still maybe showing open through Catholic Charities. How do we approach that?
They can still use that. Because they've been seen within the last 90 days, they're still eligible for services there.
Okay,
so providers Yep, providers keep them open for 90 days. Yep.
Okay, so we aren't going to be concerned about that.
So you would just say follow up with your counselor at Catholic Charities.
Okay, all right, perfect.
So when let's say they went to detox, the detox is a time limited. The detox is going to close them.
Mm-hmm.
Do they also close the wrapper, or does them close the wrapper?
The discharge completes it.
So really, all the wrapper is opening it up so that the provider can do their admission and discharge that they're already doing. This is just the wrapper, which allows then, say somebody from Catholic Charities is discharging them, and we find out they're out of compliance, and the person that discharged isn't there anymore, which happens all the time, right? And so now there's nobody at Catholic Charities that can change that data. That allows them to go into the wrapper part and document all of that information. They can show that it was a reschedule and put the new dates in. They can show, and that can be done on our side, it can be done on their side by anyone. So, because what we ran into before is we didn't have a way for the provider to change their information once it was in there.
Right.
Because staff's constantly changing. So we tried to create something where we could go in and update it, or someone from that provider, an admin, can go in and say, entered this information as start of service. It was actually this date.
I'm really sorry, I personally have to leave right now because I'm supposed to be in TPT an hour ago. So I'm going to have to end this meeting, but I encourage everybody, if there's a question that you thought of, like, oh, I forgot to say what if, can you email the group, and let's motor through these things sooner than later.
Can you start an email, Jess, with everybody that's been in this meeting so that we have everybody's email address?
I don't, if you guys keep telling me who your
We
guys
can.
are, then
Okay, absolutely. Yep.
okay, I'm going to end the recording.